Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to my podcast series, Finding My Way, a memoir by Jerry Morton. This is podcast 81, A Dental Story. Podcast 81, A Dental Story, is an account of my childhood dental experiences, the adventures of my capped front tooth, and the extraction of an impacted wisdom tooth while in the Army. Podcast 81, A Dental Story. Recently, I went to the local dentist office for my 6-month dental evaluation and teeth cleaning. Since my dental insurance coverage had changed, I was seeing a new dentist and dental hygienist. While cleaning my teeth, the dental hygienist commented that the fillings of my teeth had to be old. They had to have been done a long time ago. After a certain point, I appeared to stop having cavities. Her comments prompted me to tell 3 stories about my teeth. When my family lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, I was attending elementary school. We lived there from 1952 to 1956. My father had been transferred from St. Louis, Missouri, to the Coast Guard buoy tender stationed on the Ohio River. The Coast Guard's medical and dental health services were provided through the public health services there. I remember almost always having to have at least one cavity filled every time I went to the dentist's office in the early Cincinnati years. I remember because back then they did not give children Novocaine. You just had to sit in the dental chair, smelling the burnt dust of your tooth being ground by a drill while squirming lower and lower in the chair as the pain from that drill accelerated. The dentist would stop the drilling every once in a while to let you return to an upright seated position, spray water in your mouth, and let you rinse it and finally spit it in the swirling basin on the side of the chair. Yes, I remember that all of a sudden I no longer had cavities. Years after the family had moved from Cincinnati, my mother told me that back then she had signed me up to be in an experimental dental research group funded by Procter & Gamble. They were testing to see if fluoride in toothpaste reduced cavities in children. She didn't know if I was in the group that got the fluoride or the group that just got regular toothpaste. Since I stopped getting cavities after the start of the research project, she guessed I had been in the group that received the fluoride toothpaste. I think she was right. At the age of 11, I knocked out the lower half of my upper front tooth in a Mount Healthy swimming pool. The public health dentist put some black stuff on the fairly flat surface of the busted tooth and told my parents that when I got older it should be capped. If it were capped any earlier, it would probably be knocked out several times. I was a physically active child. Not until the end of football season in my senior year of high school did I finally get it capped. During those uncapped years, I was self-conscious of that broken half-size front tooth with the black coating on the end of it. As a result, I learned to smile more with my eyes than with open lips. Today, I still smile without showing my teeth. The reason the tooth was finally capped at the end of my senior football season was the result of a blow I received to the mouth while making a block on a couple of guys on the other team. My team's dentist ran onto the field as I was coming off of it to examine my teeth as blood flowed from my mouth. He determined that my old damaged tooth had lost about half from the half that was left from the first injury. Two other guys on our football team had both of their two upper front teeth totally knocked out earlier in the season. The dental insurance had covered their costs, and it covered the charges for capping of my front tooth. Everything went well with my newly capped front tooth right through my 4 years of college. 6 days after graduating from Center College, I was to be married to my sweet love. We knew we would marry by Christmas time of our freshman year. Her aunt lived in a nearby town. She had the most wonderful rose garden. It was there we had the wedding ceremony. Fortunately, I was able to live in my dorm room the 6 days between graduation and our wedding day. The night before our wedding, I decided to walk down to the Cup and have a Coke or something. I just needed to pass the hours doing something. The Cup was a restaurant-type gathering place less than a half a mile from the college campus by the railroad tracks. It was usually occupied by townies, railroad workers, and other men who survived by using their muscles. I can't recall ever seeing a woman patron in the place. A few college guys, like myself, would go to the Cup late at night after studying hard during the earlier hours. There were a couple of pinball machines that were almost in continuous use. The place was always crowded. Anyway, I went to the Cup and got a bottle of Coke. There seemed to be more guys there than usual. All of the pinball machines were pinging away with their operators actively swinging their arms and swaying their bodies, trying to help the pinball land in certain holes to drive up their total scores. As I was walking by the last pinball machine in the line of machines, I took a long slug of Coke from the bottle. As the bottle was firmly attached to my lips, the pinball operator pulled his arm back to slam his hand on the top of the pinball machine as punishment for its failure to cooperate. This motion allowed his elbow to forcibly slam into the flat bottom of my Coke bottle, which caused the bottle's narrow opening to focus the full force of his charging elbow onto my capped front tooth. The cap shattered. All that was left of that upper front tooth was a small white spike of my tooth. I spit the crushed pieces of the crushed cap into my hand as the pinball player apologized. I nodded with acceptance while my free hand tried to hold back the pain in my mouth. The open gap in my mouth, where that upper front tooth should have been, was now a skinny ivory toothpick that should have had an olive stuck on it. In all of our wedding pictures, I smile with my lips closed. A few weeks later, I did get the tooth recapped. That cap fell out about a year afterwards while I was a graduate student at Miami University of Ohio. Fortunately, I found a dentist in Oxford who assured me that he could put a porcelain cap on the tooth that would last a long time. It has. The last tooth adventure I shared with the dental hygienist was what the Army dentist at the Special Warfare Center did while pulling an impacted wisdom tooth. The year was 1968 or 69. At first, I thought I had an infection, as it seemed the glands in my neck were swollen. The Army doctor didn't think my self-diagnosis was correct. He referred me to the dental clinic attached to the Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg. That dentist, a captain, said I had an impacted wisdom tooth that needed to be pulled. The dentist showed me the x-ray of my lower left wisdom tooth. It was totally embedded under the gum. In his words, It had not erupted out of the gum. It could not erupt out of the gum because it was growing sideways, pushing the last visible tooth into that whole line of lower teeth. That was why my lower jaw and face were swollen. We scheduled a time for me to come back to get the tooth pulled. He said that he'd have to cut open the gum above the submerged tooth. That would enable him to grab the tooth and pull it out. Since the work was to be done in the morning, he would write me a note to carry to my CO, requesting that I be allowed to take the whole day off. I would experience some pain after the Novocaine wore off. I would be given some sort of pain medication. It would help me manage the pain that would come later. The next day, I should be ready to resume my Army duties. After this brief explanation of the impacted wisdom tooth pulling process, he asked me if I would be willing to donate the tooth to a dental research project he and others were doing. He thought the tooth was in good shape. It might be a good tooth for their research. I joyfully agreed. All I wanted was for the pain in my lower jaw to go away. One day of discomfort was a small price for the relief the tooth extraction would bring. Laughingly, I responded that I had no use for the tooth. They could have it. I asked what the research was trying to prove. He explained that they were trying to see if a perfectly healthy tooth could be transplanted into someone else's set of teeth. He had actually donated one of his teeth to the research, he stated, pulling back on a cheek to expose an empty space in his row of teeth. As I left his office, I felt fairly certain that I would not have one of my perfectly good teeth pulled to donate to a research project. My dentist was dedicated to his profession. He had my confidence. I arrived at the dental surgery center on time. It wasn't like his office complex with the individually contained rooms housing a dental chair, the drill, and other related equipment. The dental surgery center was one large warehouse-like space with rows and rows of dental chairs filled with soldiers having their mouths open and things happening to them. There were dental people all over the place dressed in their white coats, covering their army uniforms and their white-gloved hands. The usual dentist equipment typically found surrounding the dental chair in your family dentist's office was missing. The whole scene was very confusing. My dentist greeted me cordially enough and guided me to a dental chair. He was all business at this time. He didn't waste his time on pleasantries. As I sat in the dental chair, he explained that he was going to give me several shots of a painkiller and then allow time for the shots to take effect. He would come back to me to find out if I had any feeling around the impacted tooth. If I did, he'd give me some more shots. Once all feeling was gone around the impacted area, he would begin opening the gum tissue so that he could pull the tooth. It did take 2 rounds of painkiller shots before I lost all feeling around the impacted area. I could feel the pressure of the knife cutting through the gum to expose the wisdom tooth. He kept using a suction tube to suck up the blood and saliva from my mouth. Next, he inserted a large pliers-like instrument into my mouth. I could hear the sound of the pliers scraping against the tooth and feel massive pressure in that area, but it did not hurt. Again and again he would pull and twist the pliers, put them down, pick up the scalpel and cut some more, and then reapply the pliers to the tooth. This action kept repeating itself without a comment from the dentist. Twice he left me to get a different configured pliers-like tool and tried to clamp the tool to the impacted wisdom tooth. I couldn't help but notice that the tugging and pulling he had done on that tooth had caused him to break into a full sweat. His face was dripping sweat. This struggle was taking a long time, and my feeling of pressure all over that back jaw was significantly increasing, but still no pain. I didn't know that pulling an impacted wisdom tooth could take so long. But then, what did I know? This was the first impacted tooth I had ever had pulled. Still, without saying a word to me through this entire process, my dentist set down his tools and walked away from me. He walked towards the middle of this large open room and approached a big, burly major, dressed in an identical costume as worn by my dentist. The two of them conversed with each other for several minutes. Then the major motioned to several others dressed in the uniform of the day. Several men and women huddled around the major as he spoke to them and then pointed at me. This large mass of people began walking as one straight to me. Without a word being spoken, the major climbed up on my chair. With both feet firmly planted on the arms of the chair, he held out his hand. Someone slapped a big pair of jawed pincers into his open hand as he leaned towards my open mouth. All of the others came up close behind him, holding up their hands as if to block him from falling backwards. He put those pliers into my mouth, grabbed what I assumed was a chunk of the exposed wisdom tooth, and placed both hands on the handle of the pliers. He jerked back, using his full body weight to pull on those thick arms, with his hands tightly gripping the tool attached to my tooth. The tooth made a popping, suction-like sound as it zipped out of my mouth. The major momentarily lost his balance. Disaster was avoided thanks to the many supportive extended hands reaching up to brace him from a fall. He climbed off of my chair and began walking away. The mass of people behind him simply turned and followed the tooth puller. Not one word came from the group during the entire process. I sat alone in that crowded warehouse of a room. My memory of the immediate events after the herd of people had left me is unclear. I think the captain came back and showed me the extracted wisdom tooth. I remember seeing it and being surprised as to how big it was. The root was very long. Someone gave me a bottle containing capsules of pain medication. That was it. I was dismissed. I could go home. Fortunately, we lived on post. It didn't take long to get to our duplex. I laughed as I told my wife the story. Who would ever believe it? These things could only happen in the movies or in the army. My jaw was swelling, but that was to be expected. Since the painkiller shots were still in effect, I decided not to take the prescription medicine. The experience did seem to have tired me out. I went to sleep. Waking up early that evening, I found myself in deep pain. I took the pain medication. After waiting more than an hour for the medication to take effect, I was disappointed. I seemed to be in greater pain than before. By 2 a.m, I could barely stand the pain. My wife was right. There had to be something wrong with how the medicine was working. She drove me to the base hospital. Fortunately, someone was working in the pharmacy at that late hour. The pharmacist looked at the prescription information on the bottle and said, "Yeah, that was a bad batch of narcotics. It's nothing but powder. Someone stole the narcotics and substituted the powder for it. I'll give you another painkiller. It'll work." It did. At 0800 hours that morning, I reported to the Psychological Warfare Center to fulfill my military obligations for the day.